With us, NewsNation contributor Kurt Bardella, veteran political and media strategist. Good morning to you both. Thanks as always for being here. Let's begin with the thought that Nicole Shanahan may be his pick, entrepreneur and lawyer from California. Boyd, does this help raise his profile, even talking about Aaron Rodgers as a possibility for RFK?
Yeah, I think everything he's doing is trying to appeal, as he said himself, that this is all about attracting younger voters, getting those who are disgruntled with the bipolar, I guess is probably the right word, the polar opposites and extremes of both the parties that nobody's happy with. Everyone's exhausted and exasperated by that. And young people in particular, they're not excited about the former president. They're not excited about the current president. And so I think having someone young, high tech, someone who's innovative and is going to take a fresh approach to things, I think is appealing to some of those younger voters.
Kurt, as we talk about those swing states, 7 of them, the idea that elections are won in the margin, any third party candidate can have some serious sway here. How does someone like RFK, if he does in fact get on the ballot, impact this election come November?
I think when you look at an election that, by all accounts, is going to be one of the narrowest that we've had in American political history, any type of presence by someone who's got the most famous name in American political history, Kennedy, could have an impact. I mean, we're talking some states are going to be decided by just tens of thousands or singly thousands of votes. This is why you're seeing so much activity amongst both parties at this point. Trump donors are fueling the super PAC that's supporting Bobby's campaign. And the DNC just announced in the last week that they're creating kind of an internal task force to do rapid response communications, messaging, and attacks against Bobby. Clearly, both parties feel that there's going to be some impact of him if he's able to qualify on those ballots in the swing states.
Let's talk specifically about some of these swing states. Again, 7, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. In 2020, Biden won 6 of those. In Arizona, Boyd, the Latino vote makes up a larger share of that state's population than other battleground states. Trump appears to have the edge right now, courting that vote, something Biden did in 2020. What do you attribute that shift in the last few years?
I think a lot of it is just the disconnect. I think some of the things that the Biden administration has been trying to tout in terms of Bidenomics and some of the policy wins that they can claim just haven't been congruent with what those people are experiencing as they sit around the kitchen table and try to make ends meet as they go through the month. And so inflation, gas prices, all of those kinds of things are the things that seem to be the disconnect and the real struggle point for the current president. And I think just to Kurt's point, in terms of both parties are very nervous about third party candidates of all kinds, not just Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but others who may pull some things away. And I actually think that's a good thing in a year when a lot of people are going to be looking at this as the lesser of two evil kind of votes. All of these matter, but it's important, Marnie, that we all get past that, that we start looking at this differently, that there is a choice and we should have a choice. It's the most sacred right and duty we have to vote. And especially in these swing states, who shows up is going to matter. And if they just show up and hold their nose is one thing. If they start to say, we want different and expect different, then we just might get different.
Yeah, exercise your right to choose and make your voice heard. And if you don't, then don't complain about it, right? Kurt, in Georgia, despite facing 10 charges in that state for election interference, Trump is also slightly ahead in some of the polls over Biden. In this state where there's a higher proportion of black voters, what do you attribute some of Biden's struggles in that state and that Trump has still, despite legal issues, been able to capitalize there?
Well, again, I think that we've seen in so many elections that we've had in the last couple of years, the polls say one thing: Biden's approval rating is underwater. The president lags behind, generic Republican A, B, or C, and yet Democrats continue to outperform those polls and perform better. Ultimately, these things are about turning out the vote. It's about the organizational structure and ability and tactical talent of the Republicans and the Democrats of the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign. Whoever does the best job of getting their side to show up, that's just going to win. There's not a lot of undecideds anymore. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are 2 of the most well-known political presidential candidates in American history, right? Everybody knows who they are. Most people know how they feel about them one way or the other. So it's really about getting people to show up. 2020 was the most populated election turnout in American political history. There's nowhere to go but down from there, realistically, especially when you look at both parties are, frankly, not really terribly excited about either candidate. So it comes down to getting folks to show up. And that's something that, all due respect to our friends at DDHQ and my bud Scott Tranter, who runs that operation and is a New Max side, it's like, listen, It comes out to operations and the issues. And right now, the trend that we have seen in every election since Roe was overturned is that Democrats are overperforming and Republicans are underperforming.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you to you both, Boyd Matheson, Kurt Bardella, as always. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Marnie.
Have a great day.